The last movement of Brahms 4 is on the list for many of the same reasons as the coda of the first movement was on the list. It's a test of sound quality, a little bit endurance. It's a decently long excerpt pitch, but mostly pulse. That's the biggest problem I usually have listening to versions of this excerpt. It's a set of variations, and each one sometimes wants to have its own tempo, and you don't want to display that inconsistency in tempo. So that's the first thing I'm thinking when I start this one. And as I often do, I think of the fastest note values that I'm going to have to play, and then translate that back to the beginning. So in this excerpt, obviously, it's those triplets near the end. What's the fastest that I want to comfortably play those? Something like that. I wouldn't want to go faster than that. So that gives me 1, 2, 3, 1. The problem is, as with so many excerpts, it's easy to start this one faster than that because it's easier to show the musical line when it's faster. And that tempo that I had just played can feel slow in the beginning. Especially at letter B, those eighth notes, musically we want to move them, but it doesn't quite work that way. If you were playing it in the full orchestra in the section, you wouldn't be so tempted. You'd hear that sonority, you'd feel the resistance, and it would just be natural to really luxuriate in it. When we play by ourselves, one puny little violin, it's easy to feel like we've got to make something happen. The shapes are already put in there for you, and the shapes are musical. Do it with sound and not with tempo. So again, if I think my triplets, my sixes, I mean. Dum, bum. And so one pulse. If you wander just a little bit, nobody's going to notice, but no big. I'll tell you the places where I always notice the same tendencies. B always wants to get faster, and sometimes the beginning has already started fast. C almost always wants to get slower. So just keep the 16ths going in your ear. And 65, that variation, almost anything can happen. I've heard that get really slow, I've heard that get really fast. 73, the sixes, if you haven't planned for them from the beginning, then usually 73 ends up having to slow down. So check those with the metronome. I don't play, you know me, I don't play whole pages with the metronome or anything. What you want to do is test the seams in between the variations. So going from the bar before B to B, for example, or maybe 2 bars before B into B, you'd turn on the metronome and just play click, click. And what you're listening for is to see if your very second eighth note at B is right with the click. It's got to be exact right from the beginning. If you notice that you're slow or fast, then do it again and make that adjustment until you're consistently right with the metronome across the seam of the variation. You've got to do that for every one of these variations to test the pulse. So now the kind of sound, obviously this is romantic, connected, but the vibrato has to center on the pitch, and you have less room for vibrato, of course, the more quickly the notes are moving. So in the beginning you've got a little bit more room, although I still want it centered on the pitch. Be very sure of which shifts and reaches you want your listeners to hear and which you don't. There are a few of these where I think it's natural to show a little bit the shift or the slide, but most of the time I'm hearing too much of that. It sounds a little goopy. When you get to the eighth notes at B, these notes are moving more quickly. There isn't as much time for wiggles in the vibrato. So for something like this, it's kind of one of those in-between speeds. Do I vibrate? Do I not? I like to vibrate, but I like to imagine that the whole hand is alive. So whichever fingers are moving in there. it's that kind of thing, so that the bow is making the shape, the hand is alive, and gives that warmth. I've modified a couple of the bowings in here in ways that I'm used to doing, playing it in orchestra, so feel free to do it as I do. C, up high on the E string like that, now there's even less room for width in the vibrato. You really want to focus it. Focus on the bow for sound quality. Let the hand be nice and light. Focused on the pitch again there. If you do my fingering, then you can reach for that 10th without having to shift. That's a big deal. Now these 16ths, I often hear them stylized, where they're almost double dotted, you know. Instead, keep it really pa-pum, pum-pum, give them each their own weight. Already talked about how 65, keep the same pulse. Count the rests. Those rests at the end of the bar often get swallowed up a little bit. With the baryolage stuff starting at 69, just as little vertical motion as you can get away with, right? You don't want it, rather almost like it's a double stopped. The fingerings that I choose for the sixes coming up, I like being able to grab the first note on the G string. That's the main point for me. It also means I don't have to shift during the arpeggio, which can also be nice. You can come up with a different fingering if you aren't comfortable, especially with the second one being. I've always found that comfortable, and again, I like grabbing it on the G string. And for both of those, practice the open strings. You know, if you use my fingering, it's easy enough to play them in tune, but sometimes they don't sound super clean because the bow's not on the right strings. So if you're playing my fingering, the corresponding open strings would be. So if you can get that up to tempo clean, then that won't be a problem to match the fingers to that. That's basically all there is to this one. The consistent pulse, the warm sound that has life to it, but that doesn't obscure the pitch. Those are your challenges in this one.